Yeah, you need that balance because if you have one without the other, you're not like fully alive. You know, to
Right.
not sound like a total hippie, but yeah, it's. I mean, that's kind of. I mean, that's the gist of it. I think it makes sense, and it's funny because we see it in pop culture and films, and we always see like these people who you work in cubicles, you drive home in a cubicle essentially on the freeway, and then you go home to your little apartment, right, your own cubicle. And I mean, in the film, one of my favorite films, Fight Club, obviously that's a dramatization, that's theatrical, it's an exaggeration, but it's kind of a similar point where they start a fight club because the narrator tells the other character how much do you know about yourself if you've never been in a fight. And there's something very primal about being in a fight and having to fight someone and have these adrenaline and this chemical and just that very primal state of just being in a fist fight with someone. And
Mm-hmm.
it's something that they were kind of longing for because they were very conditioned, right, as to what males were supposed to be. And it's something that I see there, obviously in a more dramatized fashion. But that's something that I kind of connect where people kind of long for this human emotion and this human like adrenaline in a way.
Yeah, that's powerful. I can't believe I haven't seen Fight Club because it's like a classic. I haven't seen
Yeah,
it,
it's
and
like a cult classic, right? It's enjoyable. I mean, I enjoyed it. It's definitely worth a watch. I really enjoyed it.
yeah, yeah. And what you're saying is, I think I was actually I saw someone post the other day, and it was a man, and he had been sort of looking at his relationship to like having become the nice guy, and then having missed all of this opportunity to integrate like the he called them darker in this way, but I would say that what you're saying perhaps is about like that primal,
Yeah,
the aspect that's a fighter, that's a protector, that's the hunter, that's this. And I
yeah.
think that I can't speak for men because obviously that's not how I was incarnated this time.
Mhm.
But I think there is something there, right? Like that being able to have a link to that must be so important for manhood and an integration of not feeling split and actually coming into one's power. And I think the same is true for women, which is like how I would relate to it is coming out of good girl conditioning, be the good girl.
Yes, I was gonna ask you about that next.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coming out
Yes.
of good girl conditioning to
Mhm.
honor the dark feminine and the light and
Mhm.
like and both of it, the sort of like primal and angry
Mhm.
and rageful, and then the beautiful and the generous and the compassionate. And so it's like
Mhm.
when we can weave those more, I feel like then we become much more of the whole, which is to bring back the symbol of yin and yang. It's
Mhm.
like it's all in there. It's not just half, it's both. It's all in there. Hmm.
Yeah, so like going to gooder conditioning, and I guess I'll kind of steer us that way in this fashion. Shout out to one of my earlier guests, Alana. She mentioned how women, societally speaking, they're put in a position where they're being asked to be. It's like the Madonna complex. They're being asked to be, the holy virgin at the same time, the mother, the provider, which is, it's kind of a paradox. But do you feel like is that similar to good girl conditioning, or would you break that down for us? Good girl conditioning. Because I've
Yeah.
actually never heard that. I've never heard that phrase, and I'm usually in these realms of terminology, and I've never heard of good girl conditioning. So
Yeah, I'll describe how I've extracted good girl conditioning to present, and then I guess you can tell me if it sounds similar to
okay,
what you guys discussed about the Madonna complex. But good girl conditioning coming into like there's a lot of people pleasing
yeah,
and perfectionism and putting self last or putting self after others. It's like making sure that everything is good, everyone feels good, there's no tension in the space. I'm not going to make tension happen. I'm going to be nice and I'm going to be good and I'm going to get good grades and I'm going to look the part and I'm just going to be really pleasant, which looks like perfectionism, people pleasing,
mm-hmm.
putting ourselves last.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and often creates a lot of inner turmoil, inner unsettledness, anxiety, from my experience, depressive episodes, and really the sense of like, I don't know who I am, but we might not even get there because a good girl can be so conditioned to make sure that she's sourcing self-worth
Mm-hmm.
and peace from how everyone around her is doing and how well she's perceived, like how she's perceived, right? So
Yeah.
fear of judgment and fear of rejection is all really big. So in that sense, at a certain stage, we might even not realize that, like, oh, I don't even know who I am or what I want. But when the door opens to look at that, I think that's when the opportunity to move out
Mhm.
of the good girl pathway, let's say,
Mhm.
opens, because then we can start to look and like, oh my God, who am I? Like, if I'm not trying to please everyone or look
Mhm.
perfect or be perfect, what do I want? Who am I?
Yeah.
How would I show up for this? You know? And we start to
Mhm.
realize that yeah, that there's a lot to explore, which can be a little difficult, and it's liberating, and it's the pathway to liberation. So yeah, that's how the first part is how I would describe good girl kind of
So do you feel
behavior.
like the pendulum swings back the other way? Because it's almost like it's a trope almost that when people, boys and girls, are raised like in a religious household, first chance they get, whether it be college or moving out by themselves, are going to go extra hard because it's going to swing the other way because they weren't able to experience certain experiences in adolescence. That's similar
Mm.
to like when someone goes into that discovery mode of, okay, who am I now? Does the pendulum swing far the other way now because they have to explore?
I can't speak to it from a place of like having studied this on a psychological level and like all of that, but I would say that that's my impression, that we
Mm-hmm.
do tend to swing the opposite way, and especially if there's been much more restriction in one's life. I think I've observed in people and in friends who had more restriction than I had, that the pendulum needed to go quite far to then
Yeah.
come back to like a place where it's like the wholeness of
Mm-hmm.
who they really feel they are, and how
Mm-hmm.
they're presenting from a more grounded place shows up. I think that's true for anything, right? Like if we take, for example, good girl conditioning, if someone's really used to people pleasing and being a yes person, and this happens for boys and men too in their own way,
Yeah.
which is like
Yeah.
I always say yes, and like I don't want to be an inconvenience, and I put everyone else's needs first. What
Mm-hmm.
could happen is, in order to break free of that, it starts to become like I'm saying no to everything, and I'm kind of like
Yeah.
angry and rebellious. And then we can find that place of
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, let me check in. What is my yes? What is my no? Versus like everything's a no, and I need to be like boundaried everywhere, and and angry and all of that. So it doesn't always have to go that way, I don't think, but it can be, and often that is the way that we find balance.